Hello and welcome back to Bookish. I can't believe I'm doing this, but I'm going to make a response video to Adrian and Dalton and Steve Donoghue, who just posted their review of The Road over on Strip Cover Lit's channel. I'll leave a link below. If you haven't watched it, you really should. Their videos are excellent. The beginning of the Strip Cover Lit guys video is funny. Their takedown and their skewering of certain parts of McCarthy's The Road, I think, are well done and insightful. Steve Donoghue has a review that they posted at the end of their video, which is exactly what you expect from Steve Donoghue video. It's thorough, it's professional, it's clear, it's really well done, and I really like those videos, and I hope you go and watch it if you haven't already. And so I hope if they see this, which I doubt they will, but if I hope that if they see this, they'll take it in the spirit in which it was intended. And that spirit is to engage in a discussion about a work of literature who doesn't necessarily agree with them, and who thinks on some level that their criticism of The Road is unfair. I say this as someone who is not one of those The Road people. I do like a number of Cormac McCarthy's novels. The Road is not anywhere near my favorite, but having said that, that doesn't mean I think it's nearly as bad a book as Adrian and Dalton and Steve Donoghue do. So there are a couple things in their criticism of the book that I did want to address. Number one, and this is just kind of a basic thing, I think that, like it or not, we have to take the book that the author intended to write and evaluate it as a book the author intended to write. And to me, The Road is clearly an allegory about humanity or civilization and its journey into the future. This is why the man and the boy have to keep going down the road. This is why when they're beset with obstacles, whether they're in the form of cannibals or starvation or even the temptation to hole up in a bunker full of food and just try to, I guess, live forever in there, they have to keep going because it's an allegory about the progress of humanity, and I think the threats to humanity's progress, or at least the progress of civilization. And so I think you have to evaluate it as an allegory. You know, we don't usually require our allegories to be particularly realistic. I don't think people require realism from Animal Farm or from something like Pilgrim's Progress or even from Gulliver's Travels. We accept that these are allegories, that there is a lesson about humanity or civilization or morality somewhere in there. Now, having said that, McCarthy's allegory may fail as allegory, but I think we have to evaluate it as that. Therefore, I don't really think it's entirely fair to criticize the book for not being realistic. I don't think it intends to be realistic. I don't think realism is at the heart of the novel. I think it is this story about progress and continuing to move forward, and as McCarthy says, perhaps somewhat pretentiously, to carry the fire of civilization forward, to make sure it's preserved, and it goes on. And to be honest with you, it can't be preserved if they hole up in that fallout shelter full of food. It's only preserved as long as the two of them have food and can live there. They have to keep going. You know, I think that's kind of the point. And so, yes, it's not realistic, and yes, it's not fully fleshed out on all the details, because the point of the novel isn't the realism, it's the lesson or the allegory. Additionally, I really think what bothers, and it seems to me what bothers Adrian and Dalton and Steve somewhat, is that they see the novel as a work of post-apocalyptic science fiction, and yet it fails at world building. Again, I don't think McCarthy intended to write a work of science fiction. I think he intended to write an allegory. Now, you can say that allegory is pretentious. You can say that allegory doesn't work. You can say his conceit fails. Fine, I won't argue with you, but I think you have to evaluate the book based on what the book sets out to be. I just think to take a work that intends to be one thing and evaluate it based on the fact that it fails at another is just really not treating the book fairly. Additionally, there are a number of comments that both Steve and Adrian Dalton make about the writing and how pretentious it is at various points. I believe Steve uses the phrase purple prose, and I will admit that I believe there are some places in which McCarthy's attempt at overly poetic language fails. I also think there's some occasions where it succeeds. And, you know, in a sense, this, along with the not putting in quotation marks and things like that, this is kind of McCarthy's style. And you feel free to not like that style and to think that that style intrudes on the book. I agree with you in some ways that it does. You can say that his insistence on using this flowery prose for some descriptions violates the rules of good writing because he A, doesn't have a narrator, and B, the character whose head we're inside of, the man's character, is clearly not thinking these things. I think that's fair. I would just point out that lots of great novelists and writers, and some of those who we consider to be among the greatest, have frequently broken the rules of, you know, workshop writers conferences and workshop writers programs. So I'm not going to really hold that against him. Additionally, Steve specifically talks about how the characters don't develop, and he seems really bothered by the fact that they don't have names and we don't know anything about them. I will again just go back to the idea that I think they represent humanity in general, and that's why I think they are the man and the boy, because they could theoretically be any man or any boy who has retained their dignity as human beings and is a part of preserving humanity. If you give them a name, if you give them a backstory, they become specific people. And as specific people, I don't think they work as well in the allegory. That's just me. I could be completely wrong about that. Additionally, and one of my favorite things about Steve Donoghue's criticism videos is I love when he goes off on Dude Bro Lit as someone who I think is probably a fan of what Steve Donoghue would call Dude Bro Lit from time to time. I really enjoy this, and I'm looking forward very much to Steve Donoghue's video in which he describes all the rules of Dude Bro Lit so that we can all identify all the parts of it when we see it in works of fiction. I really think that would be a great video, and I look forward to it. But until then, what we have is just kind of this kind of running list of things that he classifies as kind of Dude Bro Lit. And the one I think he takes exception with here that I remember from the review is the man's constantly doing an inventory of the things they had and running through in detail how everything works and running through in detail how they do everything. And this bothers Steve because he thinks it doesn't have any meaning. He certainly could be right. But what I would say is, in a post-apocalyptic world, however metaphorical, I think what mankind would be worried about is their list of assets. I think we would constantly be looking back over the things we have going for us, much as I do in the Donald Trump years, seeing, you know, anyone who stands up to Trump as an asset, anyone who the election of a Democratic House as a step in the right direction of preserving what this country is all about. I oftentimes go through that list almost like a mantra to make myself feel better about where we are as a country and to give me hope for the future. So I'm not going to hold that against him. The detailed description of everything they do, is it possible that McCarthy intends this to be an indication through the writing of how careful and measured and observant the man has to be in order to preserve the boy, to carry the fire forward, to preserve humanity and civilization? You know, I think that's possible. Now, having said all of that, and I think those are the things I wanted to defend the book on, I don't have a problem with them disliking the book. I don't have a problem with them hating the book or giving the book a negative 11 million score or thinking the book was absolutely terrible. I don't. You know, I think I can see their point about any number of things that they brought up in the book. And there are passages where I think the prose is purple, and there are elements of the story that I think are plotting, and there are parts of the dialogue that I think are just flat and boring and don't actually convey anything important. I think all that's true, but that doesn't mean I don't think that it's a good novel. It can have flaws and still be a good novel. And, you know, I wouldn't rate The Road as a great novel. I'm not one of those people. I can see why people like that love the novel, and they just see something in it that I don't see, and I think that's great. But I do think it's a good novel. I think it's effective. I think it works. You know, for me, the story, such as it is, as thin as the plot is, as Steve rightly points out, I think, it is still a plot that resonates. In the end, the man's character does develop. He deteriorates. He starts off stronger, and he starts off more morally sound and right, and near the end of the book, just before he dies, he's physically deteriorated and he's morally deteriorated. Even the boy points out that at the end of the book, the man is acting more like the bad people than the good people, and that literally, to me, is the passing of the torch of humanity, of civilization, from the man to the boy, who lives on and meets up with another group of human beings who are going to carry the fire forward. So, I can see the claims of pretentiousness. I can see the claims of the thinness of the plot and the plotting of the pacing and all those things. And like I said, I think I really enjoyed their criticism, their videos. I just think it's a little unfair to criticize a book for not being what the author didn't intend for it to be. I think we have to take the books as the authors give them to us and evaluate them based on what the author's intent was. And then if the author fails at that intent, then I think, we're perfectly free to show the ways in which they failed in their intent. I don't think realism, and I don't think evaluating the book as an incomplete work of science fiction because it fails at world building is fair, because I don't think that's what McCarthy intended. Anyway, like I said, I hope the fellows, if they see it, which I doubt they will, take this in the spirit of intellectual discourse such as I'm capable of, as I intended, and I look forward to seeing your comments, and thank you for watching.